Hey guys, you're listening to the Money Date Podcast, a podcast that my husband and I launched to help young couples get real about their money.
That's right, we'll ask our friends and a few strangers all the uncomfortable and awkward questions about how they handle their money.
All the gory details, and hopefully a few tips and tricks along the way that you can pick up and use in your own relationship.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Money Date. We have Bianca and Max joining us on today's show. Welcome, Bianca. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Hello. Thanks so much for having us.
We're excited to be here.
I'm actually going to kick you guys off today and ask you about your love story. Tell us a little bit about how the two of you met.
So we have mutual friends, and one of my good friends from home, actually, from Danville, where I grew up, invited me on a lake trip. So we literally met in the middle of nowhere on Lake Shasta.
Talk about a romantic setting.
I know, like there was more booze than water. It was like a really messy houseboat filled with like 25 randos, and Max was one of those randos.
Folks, that's how love is made nowadays.
Good old-fashioned meeting in person.
That's a lot of fun. What made Max stand out amongst all the other randos?
Honestly, we talk about this all the time still. We were like the only two responsible, really paranoid ones who wanted to stay sober enough to drive the boat around without it being an actual disaster. And there were so many people on the boat that we didn't know. So I think we were both just equally kind of like uncomfortable. And we like gravitated towards each other because of that. It's funny.
That's incredible. And were you able to avert disaster?
Yeah, it was a 3-day weekend. So it was like I think the busiest weekend at the lake. So it was there was no disaster, but it was definitely like I come from like boating experience background, so to be with like 25 people who aren't familiar with like how boats and like that type of activities work, it was kind of like I'm glad Bianca and I were babysitting all of them.
Oh my damn!
No, that's pretty impressive. We've talked with a bunch of couples now who approach situations with very different perspectives, but it sounds like the two of you at least shared a common interest, not just averting disaster, but a shared sense of concern about the well-being of everyone else. Is that sort of similarity in outlook and personality something that sort of moved forward and translated into other aspects, specifically finances, and how the two of you approach them?
Yeah, I think what Dahmer's trying to ask is, how do you guys manage your finances?
Let's just jump right into it. So yes, to Dahmer's question, we're the two people, I think, out of our family members that are like the glue. And that sort of like shared responsibility has definitely infiltrated into the way we think about money. Although I have learned a lot from Max, so I'll let him explain how he has done it for the past like 5+ years. I just recently started when we began dating like a little over a year ago.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to be a more interesting person to have on this podcast. I've been tracking my finances in like a Google sheet for the past 5 years. And so I think a quick summary of that is like I've tracked every dollar I've made and spend since I graduated college.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think it came from like a family background. It was like we were going through like the 2009 recession, where it was like there was a lot of ups and downs, and I was like trying to help the family get back on track back in like college. And so it came from like when I jumped out into like my professional career and I had my own income, had my own expenses, like with rent and everything. It was like I was like, I never want to be in a situation like that again. So I've just been like, each month I track like the income side, and then each month track the expense side, and then I keep a tally like year to date to see where I am, if I'm on track towards like my goals. A lot of that came into the relationship with Bianca and I, where she was like probably making fun of me for doing it at first, but then now it's like we're both learning a lot.
She's like, sign me up. Bianca, did you have a similar family background or not at all?
I had, luckily enough, I'm blessed to say that I had a pretty easy and like well funded and supported lifestyle growing up. I will say though that my parents, because I'm a first generation person in America, my parents specifically had a really hard time growing up financially. And from an immigration perspective, my dad came to the country, was sent back to Mexico, came back again, dealt with his dad dying, and sort of being like the man of the house financially and from a support standpoint. So they sort of paved the way and made their own success by being so financially aware. But it's interesting because they sort of, I guess, sheltered me from all of that they dealt with, and same with my sister. So I didn't really learn any of that from my parents. I learned it from Max, which has been interesting.
Thank God for that lake and for Max.
I know.
So how do you guys think about your finances today? And especially, given that you guys are slightly different personalities when it comes to money, how do you even bring those different pools of money together?
We don't have any joint account or pool necessarily, at least not yet. But what we do is track in Max's sheet, and every, I would say, like 3 to 4 days or so, we square up, and we have this essentially mantra that we will split everything 50-50. There are some exceptions, like dates or birthday gifts or stuff that is very specific to our family members that we won't split. But for the most part, I would say 90% of what we spend, we split half and half.
I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, Bianca, namely that you had a very different approach to money when you and Max first started dating, and that you've really come around and you've not so much made fun of maybe his Google Sheets and his employment of them more recently. What changed for you, and why did it change?
Yeah,
that's a good question. I think because I was so used to like growing up in the household that I grew up with, again, like so lucky and blessed to have had that upbringing. I just didn't really understand the concept of having like a fixed number to spend and not go over it. And if I did, then like what were the repercussions of that? So I never tracked expenses. It was sort of like I'll spend until I feel like it's maybe a little too frivolous, but it was all intuition based, which is so unhealthy and dumb. Mm-hmm. And I spent a lot on things that didn't matter more than things that did. I also lived in one of the most expensive neighborhoods for a while, and spent a lot on rent in the like non-intelligent way, and focused on just like doing things for fun. And a really bad habit that I had for a while, especially when I first moved here, was checking my bank account only every like 4 to 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And now I check it probably at least twice a day. And it was just an incredibly bad habit I had, where I would just like spend money. And if I got a notification that like I was close to this like random arbitrary limit that I set, then I would be like, oh, okay. Sometimes I would continue to spend. Sometimes I would hold myself back. But for the most part, there was no like close monitoring. Sometimes I didn't even like check to see if I got paid some months.
That's amazing. And it's kind of an interesting sort of experience because, there are a lot of people, especially in a city like San Francisco, who live that experience. And they're just kind of like, I don't really think about it. But, to Delmer's point, like there must have been a moment, or was there a goal or something that like made you change that behavior all of a sudden, where you were like, man, I really want to buy a house or get a dog or whatever it was that propelled you or just like inspired you to make that move?
I think it was this like larger vision I had where I was working so hard. I've been in the tech scene for so long. And it felt like this point where like, why was I working so hard if I was just going to spend my money on like experiences that I didn't really care about? So it was like a mindset shift of like investing money, being more careful about spending so I can put it towards something that like is more lasting, that I care about, which is building a family and building a house, or investing in multiple properties, things like that. So that was sort of like the aha moment for me. And it just kind of manifested itself in Max.
Oh my God, a woman after my own heart. That was exactly the inspiration that I had to be like, I want to get all of this tightened up because I want to own my own home at some point. The other thing that I'm actually really curious about is, you said we make a commitment to split everything that we spend together, or the 90% of what you spend together, 50-50. And a common question that people ask us is, how do you figure out what's fair, especially in relationships where you might make different amounts of money, or you might use things, to different degrees. Did you guys ever discuss those nuances, or were you just kind of like, nope, this is sort of how we feel about this?
Yeah, I think it stems from like, it was like past experiences. Like, if, for example, like when you live with roommates, like say you live with a house full of like 4 people. Oh, this is how we're going to stagger the rent based on like square root size. And then it's like, oh, well, I went to the grocery store this week, and where I don't get that, where like that kind of overall experience like kind of sucks. So it's just like, for me, in my opinion, and Bianca could probably add hers on this, it's just easier to just be like, oh, that's what we did. The cost of it was this. It's 50-50. Like, it's just super fair, super easy.
I would agree with that. Going like, oh, I'll get this one, you get to the next one isn't helpful for tracking. And that's like what we've been so mindful of over the past year and a half. So why would we sort of jeopardize that by like the day-to-day spending especially? So that's sort of where it comes from.
Was that sort of 50-50 split obvious from the beginning, or did you try other approaches, other systems before finally settling on it?
That's a good question.
I think before we were seriously dating, we were like, I'd pay for one meal, Bianca would pay for the next.
Yeah.
Or like I'd pay for one activity, she'd pay for the next. So we were already like kind of, I think one of the things that we liked about each other when we were first dating was like we were both super generous, where it was like, oh no, I'll get this one. No, I'll get this. Like we'd be fighting to split, to like take care of it. So it started where we were switching back and forth, and then we're like, well, it probably just makes more sense. Really, the 50-50 mindset came in when we started getting like rewards credit cards and rewards. So like we would spend all on of like a credit card I had opened or a credit card Bianca had opened. So we would put all the spending on there for like our food, our groceries, our gas, our everything but like rent. And then it would be like, oh, just like split it in half. That was kind of the more like force functioning aspect.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to Delmer and I. We were also in a long distance relationship, so we were just like, if you're always the one flying out to see me, just put it on our credit card together and we'll split it at the end of the month or at the end of the week, whatever works. So totally relate to that experience.
Yeah, and Max, you'd worked at NerdWallet before working at Twitter, and obviously one of the things that they help folks our age do is figure out how to think about credit cards. Did working at NerdWallet and sort of the expertise they have on these issues change the way that you think about your spending or about shared expenses?
I think in like parts of it did. Before NerdWallet, I've been like doing the like switching between credit cards to get like the big bonuses. I've always done that aspect of it, and then always like paid my balance off in full. But then working at NerdWallet helped explore like the avenues of like retirement more, and then more of like investing. But I'd say my overall principles I learned probably prior to that, which was kind of like what led me to wanting to work there.
Got you. And we've talked about having shared spending habits and putting these on credit cards, and part of what has unlocked that have been thinking about credit cards and rewards. We were talking a little bit in the beginning before we started recording about how, Max, you specifically think about credit cards. Maybe help us understand how you've arrived at your thinking now, and maybe any sort of lessons and stories that are worth sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, so I think where my thinking started whenever the earliest, like probably 18, when I was able to like first open a credit card in my own name. So I'm starting like baseline is like with a decent credit score, and then can open cards. And it was just like younger, always was looking at the different bonuses you get when you sign up. And so then I would like sign up for a credit card, and then I knew I wouldn't have enough money to hit the spending on my own. So I'd like ask like friends and family to make purchases on my card, or like offer to pick up the tab when we go to like dinners or movies.
Max,
and then
you're
just
exactly like my brother, and he works at NerdWallet too. Now I'm starting to wonder if all NerdWalleters are like this.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is we all like think about it. I think before we join, there's like everyone's all like little, they call them like churners there. I think that's it. But yeah, kind of came up with that when I was younger, and then when Bianca and I started dating, I know she was using like a debit card for all of her purchases for like her Citibank. And I was kind of like explaining to her, like, oh, if you like open this card, we would be able to do this. And like, it was kind of a multiple effect, because not only did she not really use credit cards before, but then like, I was like, we can put all mine and her spending on this credit card. So we'd hit like the bonuses really quick. And then use the points. Like we went to Thailand last year and paid for like, I think it was like 8 nights. We paid for the flights round trip with points, the hotels with points. And so that kind of like created that like feedback loop to where we're like always doing trips down to LA to visit my family now, where we use points when there's flights available. And it's just been mostly around rewards. And then I guess like any mishaps, like I haven't like ran up, like I guess if I pay like the balance down in full, which was like the one thing that like my mom always taught me was like, don't pay the minimum, don't spend more than you can. So that was where like the Google Sheets came into tracking, because I was using credit cards, but like a credit card, you don't see that your payment, you see what your payment is like when it's due, and you're like, oh my God, I have to spend $4K.
Yeah.
So the Google Sheet was like my pressure checker to be like, okay, I've spent $1,000 this month. I know my income is, going to be like 4,000, 5,000, and then like make sure I would use the Google Sheet to make sure I wouldn't overspend, because sometimes it kind of catches up into the rear.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the problem we're solving at Zeta. So you and I need to talk. But more importantly, I think the point you're making is really great. Like credit cards we often talk about credit cards as bad things because most of us have had negative experiences of racking up some sort of debt or some balance on there. And we all know those interest rates can be real killer. But, if for the folks who are really good at paying them off every month, and paying them in full every month, they can actually be a really powerful and great tool. And it sounds like you guys have totally figured out how to master that.
Yeah. I think I come from a world where I was just so scared of them. And I never really had experience building credit. I always just stayed away from credit altogether. And I use, again, to Max's point, I use my debit card for everything, which actually didn't help me in the long run because A, I wasn't building any credit whatsoever. B, the spend tracking was terrible, and C, like I wasn't saving anything. I was eating directly into like what I made, which made my spending feel even more like meaningless. So it's been nice to like get into the churning world, and I'm doing it now.
We could do a whole podcast on that.
So we've talked about some of your good habits that you've cultivated over time. What would you say are some of the aspects of finance that still scare the both of you today?
I think for me, I'm really worried about mortgages and working with lenders. My parents are such a great example of like successful and seamless home buying, and they've moved a bunch of times. But for some reason, I'm still just really worried about how it'll impact me. And I think it's because I'm still so new to like the world of saving and the world of credit building and the world of investing. And I haven't had like a 10 out of 10 experience with a lender or like a mortgage person yet.
How about for you, Max?
I think like at the micro level, it'd be like the eating outs and like like living in like San Francisco, there's a lot of things like friends are doing on weekends and you always want to partake. And it's like the opportunities are endless in terms of like fun activities, but it's like picking and choosing the ones that it's like, oh, we actually have never done that. That's the one I want to do. And that's the one I want to pay for. Mm-hmm. It's always like, that's like the constant, like kind of like weekly or monthly. And it's not a terrible problem to have by any means, but it's just always when I'm like, is this what we really want to do this week or this month? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the reoccurring one.
That's such a good one. Yeah, it's like a constant battle I think Max and I are aligned on, but it's still a battle, if that makes sense.
So true. I was just browsing Instagram the other day, and one of my favorite quotes was like, why are there not more rap songs about staying in and saving? And I was like, amen.
So true.
That's funny. We like Friday nights a lot of time we're both just like so beat from the week that we're like grabbing like either takeout or like even like Whole Foods, and we're just like eating and like crashing early, and it's like, oh my God, it's like the best feeling.
You were talking about alignment and sort of being aligned, at least when it came to savings and going out and sort of guarding against the tendency to just go out and hang out with friends, which is tempting. Something that Aditi and I try and do every so often to align is have these sort of money dates where we check in and look at our spending. Do you guys do anything that's that formalized to align, or do you have recurring or sort of frequently occurring conversations about your money and how you're doing?
Or what do those 3-day, every so often day check-ins look like?
Yeah, they're Asana tasks. We have a shared Asana board.
I love it.
Yeah, I get so much shit for that from my friends. They think it's... But it's effective.
You're a tech worker through and through, huh?
I know. I might have over-indexed on it a little bit because Max introduced it to me to like get my life together when we first started dating, and now he's like, whoa, so many Asana tasks, chill. I don't really use that much. But I just wanted to
That's amazing.
That I was listening to his feedback. It's funny. But yeah, when we have to square up on expenses, it's an Asana task, and we usually just do it when we get home from work.
And how long does it take usually?
Not that long. We do it like once a week. It's not like a formal like yeah, it's in an Asana task, but it's not like a formal like, oh, this is this date, because sometimes with money it's like when people owe you longer, it's weird. It's never like, it never gets like that. It's like, oh yeah, Like,
Yeah.
like I know where you live. We'll be fine.
Probably like no more than 15, 20 minutes because I go through my bank statements and you do too.
I love that. I know where you live. How bad can this get?
Right.
Speaking about checking in, something that you mentioned earlier on, Bianca, is moving from a cycle where you were looking at your statements maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks to now where you're looking at it every few days. What's motivating the need or the desire to look at it with that level of frequency today?
A healthy level of paranoia, and at the macro level, what's really important to Max and I, and what we talk about all the time, is being able to build generational wealth for not just ourselves, but our like future family, our current family, being able to set our parents especially up for success and sort of give back to the life that they gave us, because we've been so fortunate for so long. And I think that, coupled with the paranoia that I mentioned, has been super helpful for me to want to check in on my expenses as much as possible.
We typically jump into the second segment of the podcast, but Bianca, you actually said something that I think is like really, really interesting, because our generation is trying to figure out how to help our parents or how to be there for our parents, and because a lot of us, saw our parents have a hard time with money and don't want them to worry, or have learned better habits because of their experiences. And it sounds like what's interesting about both of you guys is you had experiences in your individual lives that, each sort of made you think, wow, there may be a world in the future where I'd want to be able to support my parents or help them in some way, shape, or form. How did that conversation even come up with each other? Like, how'd you guys talk about it?
That's a good question.
I think it came up firsthand where, like, Bianca saw me already kind of helping my family a good amount.
Especially your mom.
Yeah, helping out my mom, 2 younger brothers, a good amount, where I was like the like big financial supporter.
Yeah.
So Bianca saw that aspect, and then it kind of like bleeds into, it's like, oh, like here's what your expenses are now, and if you want to have kids in the future, it's like, they're gonna balloon. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of just like the reality of like, wow, like here's what we spend each month on like all the rent and like fun stuff. But if we want to fund kids, that's going to be like take a large amount. Or if you want to buy a house, it's just like you just look at those things like kind of practically, and you're like, yeah, the way, like, I guess coming from someone who has 5 years of Google Sheet spending history, it's like, oh, here's what I made this month. That's definitely not going to pay for a kid. That's definitely not going to pay a mortgage. So it's like thinking outside the box about our current spending habits to cover those like life events.
Yeah. Note to self, second puppy who eats all your cold medicine and needs to be taken to the ER is another thing that you should be planning for.
Yeah, we've definitely had the pet conversation a good amount. Bianca really wants like puppies, and I'm kind of in the camp that we're like,
and you do not.
that's going to be expensive and time consuming, like 2 things we don't really want to take on right now.
Yeah. Well, highly encourage pet insurance. If you guys haven't looked into that, look into it. It's totally worth it.
So the both of you are pretty savvy. You've also expressed sort of concerns or hesitations or fears about different aspects of finance. And I know one of the things that's helpful, at least for me, is turning to sort of trusted sources of financial advice in those moments when I'm a little uncertain about something. Max, do you have a go-to source for financial advice?
I'd say as each situation comes up, we've found like for starting a business or something, it's like you go talk to the accountant or you go talk to the lawyer and like really ask them the right questions. Same with like doing taxes. But then like, I think it's actually really, really hard to find like a one size fits all. And like, you could do unlimited reading online, like a NerdWallet or any of those websites, but you really need to like validate that learning with like kind of an expert, to where it's like, hey, what does this mean? What is this like? How do you take that like that kind of abstract, like what does planning for retirement mean for like me, Max, like, here's what I make, here's what I spend, here's where I want to be. What does that mean? And you kind of need that expert. So I'd say anytime something has come up, like helping like my mom refinance her house, it's like you find that expert that's like, how does that apply for us? And that's where I've kind of like reverse engineered into these like situations.
Yeah.
How about for you, Bianca?
I would say that, but also the like general advice giver would be my dad. Since I was 18 and I left home, he's always had full visibility into my accounts, and actually just a week or so ago, I finally broke off and got my own account and left Citibank and joined Chase, which is like so bittersweet because he's been like my guy for so long, and moved over to Chase because it'll be easier for Max and I to do finances together, and a lot of my credit cards right now are through Chase. But it was just kind of funny to realize, like, when I was at the bank, that my dad probably has been the only person that I've fully trusted with my accounts for so long.
Yeah.
And he's been the absolute best advice giver throughout my entire life. He is an incredibly frugal person, and he's also really good about getting maximum value out of every financial vendor that he's worked with, which is a really good negotiating tool that has helped me not only in finances, but also like in my daily job with recruits, since negotiating is like 50% of what I do as a recruiter. So it's really interesting to see like his skill set transfer over to like my daily life.
That's awesome. Also #adulting.
I know. It's so sad.
Congratulations, though. It's a big step.
Yeah.
So
it was good.
So your dad is this sort of good negotiator, good advice giver. What are some other examples, Bianca, of good advice that he's given you when it comes to finances?
He's definitely a plan ahead type of person. So he has different financial situations mapped out and can basically like talk you through how he would handle each one. I mentioned earlier that him and my mom have been really good over the years about buying and selling properties. So I hope to sort of mirror that sort of experience that they built for themselves. Another thing is like just sheer grit and like working hard for the type of lifestyle that you want. And I think that is an often overlooked skill that I don't realize I got directly from my parents, especially my dad, given the hardships and what he's gone through, especially since a young kid. And I think there's definitely an aspect of like where I'm at financially and the comfort that I see now because of what I learned from my dad in terms of working really hard to get there.
That's quite remarkable, and you're quite fortunate to have that sort of background and experience from him. One thing that you pointed out earlier was making that transition from Citi to Chase specifically, and you seem to suggest that it was to help you and Max coordinate better. What difficulties were you having earlier, and what did the transition help facilitate?
So I was on Citibank for a long time, and sharing logins is fine. We use 1Password, but it's nice to eventually have the opportunity to do house banking stuff and just joint accounts if we need one, all through one bank. And the interface on Chase mobile and web banking is just so much better for that.
We were in a similar position years ago where, we had different banks. I think I was with Citi, Oddity was with Bank of America, and we were looking for that way to pass sort of money back and forth to each other, but also crucially a way to deposit or a place to deposit money so that we can pay off our bills or that sort of a thing through a joint account.
But we did exactly what they did. We picked Cap One for the exact reason. We were like, oh, it's just so much easier to transfer and their mobile stuff is better. So.
Oh yeah, I definitely see where we would do like direct deposits to the same checking account.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pay credit cards, and Chase just seemed like the best choice to do it with. And there's also they are offering like a $500 bonus for new.
Yes.
That
so
helps.
I've been bugging Bianca to jump on that for about like 6 months. I was like, it's money.
Yeah, hell yeah. So now going to actually jump into the newlywed game part of this podcast, which are, we asked you guys 5 questions before we jumped into this conversation, and we asked you each to write down your answers on your own. And so we're going to now actually ask you to share those answers with us and with our listeners. Awesome. Sound good? Any questions?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
Question number 1, and Max, I'll have you answer this first. If Bianca won $1 million today, what do you think she would do with the money?
I think she would buy a house with that money. And the reason for that would be not because it's like a smart investment. The reason for that would be because she wants to have like 10 puppies and they would need a yard to run it. So if she had a house that had a yard, she could then house those 10 puppies.
At least she knows her priorities, right?
Yeah, there you go. Aditi said earlier that Bianca was a woman after her own heart, and I think that would be one of Aditi's top priorities.
Seriously,
as well.
Bianca, we need to hang out.
I know. $1 million is plenty for a house and to fund the puppy addiction.
Hell yeah.
How close was Max to what you'd actually do with the money, Bianca?
Pretty close. The buying a house theme is important, so he got that one.
Got you. If Max won $1 million today, Bianca, what do you think he'd do with the money?
I put real estate investment, and then sort of a branch of that is getting his family taken care of. So making sure that his mom and brothers and dad are set up for success.
How'd she do, Max?
Yep. That sounds spot on.
Look at you guys. Okay, next question. What's the one purchase that you and your partner have made in the last year, that your partner's made in the last year, that you are like WTF about?
Do you want me to go first? So Max came home one day. Actually, no, he did not come home with them. I came home and saw a bunch of boxes in our apartment complex, and they were survival backpacks for literally like a Walking Dead style Armageddon. It was ridiculous. And it wasn't just one, it was 4 or 5.
4. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were not cheap. Let's just put it at that.
Wait, Max, were the extra 2 just like back up for the first 2?
You got to have some in the car, maybe some at home.
Yeah, no, I wanted to buy one because we were talking about like earthquakes and stuff at work and like prepping, and I was like, oh, we should probably have like an earthquake bag. And the one of them was like, it was like $400, but if you got 5 of them,
$400.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. If you got 5, did you get 3 free?
No, it was like
Nope.
It was like 10 or 20% off. But I was thinking like, oh, I'll keep one for Bianca and I'll give one to like my brother, my mom, like Bianca's parents. But then Bianca came home and saw what price I paid for them, so we returned them all and just went with like the Amazon brand.
Thank God for Amazon. It's probably saving a lot of millennials, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been angrier.
Max, what about you? What's the one thing Bianca bought that you're just like, what?
I can't pinpoint it, but like her random like shopping urges where she'll be like, oh, I'm like going in like Hayes Valley for drinks after work, and then she'll come home with like $400 in clothes from like Azalea. So it's always like the random like impulse buys, and I'm always like, what? You spent that today on like a Tuesday?
I love it.
Yeah, damn you, Azalea. I've fallen into that trap before. Them and Welcome Stranger are the 2 in Hayes Valley that I try and avoid now.
I love that store.
Cool. Next question. Complete the following sentence, Bianca. When it comes to money, one thing that we can't agree on is blank.
Those instant gratification purchases. So that's actually a good segue. I feel like Max does research, for 5 years on like a pair of shoes, whereas I walk in and if I see some Adidas I like and they're $200, I'll get them and not even really try them on just because I like how they look.
Max, how'd she do?
Yeah, that sounds spot on.
What'd you say?
I put saving / investing / spending. Like, it's not a Bianca problem. It's more like our problem. Like, we're not. I'm not sure like what % we should be saving, what % we should be spending, what % we should be like investing in. So it's always like the ongoing discussion.
Yeah. Because you guys have different priorities, or you want to save or spend different amounts.
Yeah, that and like. It just seems like San Francisco is like such a like we've been here now 3 or 4 years. It's like such an expensive city that it's like oh, are we like on track to be ahead? Are we? What do we need to change to get ahead? So it's more like the pressure of the city being expensive and then wanting like kids or a house or something like a big expense that you're always debating like, oh, should I go out this night or should I not? Where it's always like the constant the struggle.
That's such a good point. I feel like we're always talking and maybe even disagreeing sometimes on what we should and shouldn't be spending because we don't know like if we're on the right track. There isn't a documentation on like people who are in their mid-20s living in SF trying to plan for their family's success and their own success and kids in a house should be saving and spending X amount month over month.
This is exactly the work that we want to do because we've got a lot of this data now aggregated that we can actually share out with folks like yourselves so that you know whether you're on track or not. And it's so interesting because like the one question that I get from every single couple is, how are we doing? Like, are we doing good? Is this normal? And so, the fact that you guys haven't figured that out is so not surprising because it's something that most folks have not.
And it's such a taboo thing where you're not like out with friends or like with coworkers, like, yo, how much did you save last month?
Yeah, exactly.
Like what your like out conversation goes.
No, exactly. No rap songs, you know?
Yeah.
So true.
So you talked about sort of the difficulty of understanding where you fall, and one of these things is motivated by the fact that San Francisco is a very expensive city to live in. Are those pressures internal or external? So are they motivated by family saying, "Hey, when are you two gonna settle down, have kids?" Or are they internally motivated, or both? When do you begin to feel that pressure?
I think it's mostly like internal, us just wanting to get ahead, because we haven't had those like external pressures, but it's just like internally we're just always thinking like. Now that we're like a team, we're thinking like, oh, here's what I would really want to do, like in terms of like a vacation, instead of like, oh, I just went out for drinks. And then it's like, oh, here's what we really want to do, like the type of house I'd want. So just kind of like sizing things we see in the future that we really want, and then working backwards.
So it seems to be less about the goals then, because you seem to be aligned on that, and more sort of a question of the strategy, like how much do you spend, how much do you save, how much do you invest?
Right. And then like the flip side of the denominator of the equation is like, we love San Francisco, we love being close to work. So we're kind of in the belief that like we want to be here as long as we're working here to be close. So we're trying to think like how to keep expenses low in like an expensive city versus being like, oh, we should go move where rent's less or cost of living's less. So that's like the denominator, so to say.
We knew a lot of people in New York that were similar. They were renting like 250 square foot apartments because they were like, living in New York is something that's worth the experience. So willing to rough it out if that's what we need to do. Cool. So the second to last question we have for you is, what money question do you think is important to ask your significant other when things start to get serious?
I wrote down like not necessarily how much you have in savings, because that's aggressive, but how you think about saving money, and if you don't, why don't you? And if you do, like tell me more. I wish I asked that earlier on. Actually, I wish Max asked me that earlier on to get me thinking about it.
Say more.
I guess it's just like a larger conversation of dating, but like the harder conversations should be had earlier on, and money is one of them. So it would have been nice to be like have that push to do better financially earlier on.
When did that conversation actually happen for the two of you?
When we moved in together, maybe?
Yeah, like 6 months in.
Yeah.
Well, we started having initially like 3 or 4 months in.
Yeah. I would say like 6 months actually acting on the conversations.
Gotcha. And how about for you, Max?
Mine was like student loans, debt, rent. I think those are like 3 good ones to hear like what someone's student loan situation is. And then to hear like, oh, are you making the minimum payment, or are you trying to pay that like the full, trying to break down those payments and pay it off quickly to kind of avoid that like long 10-year payback period. That's a good one. Debt's a good one. Like credit cards. Like if if you're dating and you see someone's like putting everything on a credit card, it's like, you could probably have a conversation like, whoa, like what's your balance? I don't know. It's kind of like those things where you don't want to be direct about it, but it's like, oh, what do you like? You paying your bill off in full? Like, what are you like credit card?
Guys, I love this. I just can imagine you guys like being like, so let's talk some real talk real quick.
I've always joked there should be like a dating app for like credit score or something.
Oh my God.
But no one, like, it never lands. And then I think the last one, like rent's a good one. Like if you're like, if you're paying like an absurd amount in rent for like in like a city where it's expensive, it's like, there's like, there's cheaper rooms available, there's cheaper apartments, even though it's an expensive city. So rent's like a good one to hear if someone's paying like full price for the newest apartment in an expensive city.
These aren't random, by the way. He's literally drawing from his experience with me.
He's like, and then I asked this and this and this.
I asked Bianca about all 3 of those.
When we first met, I was living in almost $1,900 a month, really shitty marina apartment. Just because I wanted to say I lived in the marina. It was so stupid. And then my student loan payment was at the minimum, and I think like 30 or 40% of my payment was going to entrance.
Yep.
And now I'm paying like $1,500 a month because of Max, and I'm on track to pay it off over the next few months.
That's amazing.
It's a big turnaround. Last question for the rapid fire set. Max, we'll start with you this time. What's your spending number?
Like spending number, I'd probably run it by Bianca if I was going to make a big purchase.
Yeah, exactly. Like what's that number that you're like, let's just check in before I go drop $400 on a backpack?
Yeah, probably $200, maybe $250. And as Bianca mentioned, there'll be a lot of research and reviews read about that $200 where it's going. So rest assured, it would be like the best one in that category for that price.
We talked earlier about $400 backpacks. Did the number drop to 200 after that experience?
Her jaw dropped when she realized that's what I spent, and I was kind of like, yeah, I guess that is kind of a lot. You should have been here. We shouldn't have left.
That's what I get for leaving.
This is what happens.
She'll never leave again.
Yeah, I would agree around 200, 300. I wrote like a note of anything not vital or like what we spend on a day-to-day basis, like food or commute, but things like gifts or clothes, furniture, all that stuff, like there definitely is a budget to talk about.
I love it. And I think, honestly, even if you build a budget and you look at it, like there's value in that in and of itself, because I think just like knowing those numbers in your mind help you, like you were saying, stay on track versus going off instinct, because your instinct can be really, really flawed based on what your mind wants to remember too.
Yeah. And I think for the budget too, it's also important, like the value of what you're getting, where it's like, oh, I've like done research and this couch is on sale for $200. It's usually like $1,000. That's like a better 200 than it's like, oh, I just paid full price for these Adidas, like didn't wait for the sale, didn't use like a coupon code. So I think the values are good.
I really think you should go to drinks with Delmar and talk to him about some of your strategies, because I too don't believe in buying full price whenever possible. And Delmar is just like, nah, babe.
I need those Adidas.
Delmar, I'm with you. A point of contention, I think, even today in our relationship is buying used stuff.
Yeah.
Like using Craigslist or using eBay, it just like creeps me out, or I'm grossed out, or I don't want to take the time.
So I want to be sensitive to your time.
Yep.
One question that we like to close everything out with is any advice that either of you have for couples who are trying to think about money together. Any tips?
Parting final thoughts.
There we go. That's what we're going to call it.
I think alignment is key, and early alignment and alignment often is what I would say. And I think the strategy to get there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I don't really have advice for that specifically. Just constant conversation about money is important. And then like setting those top line goals.
Yeah, I agree with all those from Bianca. Another one too is like pick the person you want to settle down with. Like there's definitely indicators. Like Bianca's talking about all the progress she made while we were been dating, but there was also like a lot of progress I saw that she was making, or the way she was already thinking about money that was like that got her there today. So I think it's definitely okay to have like those conversations sooner when you do want to settle down with someone, to make sure that they're the one to have those conversations with. So they're more productive conversations than like, you spent what? And it's like, whoa, because at the end of the day, it's like Bianca still, it's all her money. What she makes, what I make is my money. And it's more like, we're kind of like proactive strategizing on like what we both want in the future, like some future goal that's aligned. So I think it's definitely just awesome to be like, that's where we want to go together, not like kind of looking at like finances in the rear, like you spent this on what, because it can definitely be an unhealthy conversation. I think you can get to the healthy way, and that's like way better than calling out, random purchases.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. I love talking to folks and to couples who just like seem so aligned and are so much on the same page. So kudos to you guys for all the work that you've done. Bianca, clearly you've put energy and effort into this, and Max, you've brought so much of your own experience and growth hacker mentality to all of this, which I think is awesome. And so just wanted to say thank you to the two of you. Talking about money publicly with everybody is hard, but we've gotten so much positive feedback from the podcast. So I know people are really appreciating and valuing hearing these stories from folks like you.
Yeah, I'm one of them for sure. I've listened to you and they're awesome.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you both again for joining us tonight, and thank you for sharing your insights with our listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you again for having us. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for listening, everyone.
The Money Date podcast is an initiative of Zeta, a company that I launched to help couples track and manage their finances together. If you're inspired by what you heard on this show, you can learn more at zetahelp.com.